All right, let's get started. It's almost time. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. And happy Diwali to everyone celebrating today. I really appreciate you being here despite of all the other celebrations going on. So thank you. I'm Sarpil, and I'm the program lead for Women in Tech series. Today, we're going to talk about something more fun, broadcast television, and how the data centers that are catering to media production and distribution are changing in the face of all the cloud technologies. And to talk about that, we have our guest speaker, Michael O'Gorman. Mike and I actually know each other from Juniper Networks, where we worked together on some virtualization programs. Now he's a distinguished engineer at Cisco, Chief Technology and Architecture Office. And Mike has been running some really innovative solutions and showing them in various important broadcasters conferences. And he's going to educate us what's changing in the media data center and what are some of the solutions we're working on. So without further ado, I invite Mike. Thanks.
Thank you. So good afternoon. We just made the switch over. So thank you, Serpil, for the introduction. Yeah, we go way back. So Serpil and I have worked together for a number of years. We still work together, which is good. So yeah, I was asked today to come and talk a little bit about what we're doing in the media space. And so this is kind of a new project for our team. So as Serpil said, I work in the Chief Technology and Architecture Office. And what we've been trying to do specifically with media is understand what's happening in the industry today, what kind of changes and shifts are happening in the industry, and how can Cisco actually take some of the technologies that we've built for other industries and apply them to media. And so if we look at the actual media industry itself, it's going through a lot of change and has been over the last number of years. But most, if you talk about from content acquisition to production to distribution and all the way out to customer experience in your home or on your phone, most of the change has been happening in the distribution and the customer experience side. This whole over the top and Netflix coming in and all these new media companies having new ways to distribute content. Not a lot of change has been happening in the way we actually acquire and produce media, which is kind of interesting because the ability to acquire and produce it more effectively and differently will actually help us actually create new ways to distribute it and different types of content. So we're beginning to see a bunch of shift happening in this part of the pipeline. Now, to give you an example of what I mean by shift, this is kind of a picture to talk about in the acquisition and production stage. You have, there's been challenges as to why this hasn't happened sooner, and a lot of it has to do with the technology and data center technology and networking technology being able to keep up with what actually happens inside a production studio and in a production environment. I have some examples to kind of, give you an idea of what happens inside a regular broadcast environment today. You have multiple maybe studios. Each studio has a set where the cameras and the people are. There's a control room right beside the set because they've got cables coming out of the set going into the control room. And then the production data center or any of the equipment that's producing the show is actually inside the same room or in the same building. It's all hardwired together. And one of the challenges we have is that to break that apart is a big challenge for the industry because they use a protocol called SDI, which is those big thick cables that come out the back of cameras and microphones. They go through SDI routers, and then all of the equipment that's processing the video are all processing SDI packets. There's no IP, there's no generic network switches in here, so you have a very fixed infrastructure. What we're looking to do is kind of take that whole model and break it apart a little bit and say, let's actually have the sets being separate from the control room and the data center and put an IP network in between the two. If you have an IP network, then the actual control room and the production data centers can be much further away. So therefore, you can actually have the sets be wherever you need them to be and actually do the production further away from where the actual content is being created. Then if we take the next evolution and kind of go another step, we go, okay, we're going to separate the sets from the control room over an IP network, but we're also potentially able to put the actual cloud itself even further away because that's also connected over an IP network. And so what that really means for the industry is the ability to actually produce content exactly where it needs to be captured, but to the actual production of those content or those shows or those broadcasts where they need to be done and where the people are, and then leveraging cloud technologies where you can actually bring it into a cloud. It doesn't have to be in on-prem. So one of the companies that we're working with is NBC Universal, and so anyone who watches NBC TV shows, they do a lot of obviously live television. All of their sets that they have are fixed for one purpose. So the Saturday Night Live set is used for Saturday Night Live. It's 1 hour or 2 hours a week For the rest of the week, that set's not used for anything else because it's hardwired for that particular show, and because it's on every week, they don't reuse it because they can't have someone come in the middle of the week and change stuff. All of the control rooms are right there, right where the studio is, and all of the equipment that's processing all of the video flows coming out is also right there. It's an extremely expensive place to put a lot of equipment because it's right in downtown Manhattan. So the ability to be able to take some of that equipment and move it further away becomes a very attractive proposition for the media industries. But how do they get there is the real challenge. And when we talk about IP networks, they don't use IP networks today. They don't really understand what they are. These are broadcast engineers. So we have to figure out how we can come in to this industry that wants to change and figure out how we can help them. One of the big challenges is if an industry is changing is the actual roles of the people that are in that business today. Some of those roles need to change, and so it's not just about technology, it's about actually training and education and understanding that some of the people who've been doing the jobs, over here, we talk about the technical director or the video switcher, some of those jobs may stay the same. The interface, the tools that will give those guys inside the control room may be the exact same board with switching and all of the equipment. But actually some of the other jobs are going to change, and there's potentially some new jobs that are going to be created in this space or new roles. So acknowledging that as the industry changes, we have to help train the people in that industry to be able to accept this technology. We started a training and education program within Cisco, which is basically networking skills for broadcast engineers, because the real question is we don't want all of the broadcast engineers to have to become network experts, but they do need to have some level of understanding of the network in order to be able to leverage this technology. So we started, as I said, that training program to basically give broadcast engineers enough of a basic introduction into IP networks so they actually understand how they work. So the other big challenge that we talk about is how long is this going to take, because industry shifts can take a long time. TV's been around for a very long period of time, and in the studios not a lot has actually changed from a technology perspective. So we've been looking at what the industry thinks itself, and these are different shifts that are happening inside the industry. There's a timeline at the top. These are the two big broadcast conferences every year. There's NAB and IBC. IBC's in Amsterdam and NAB's in Vegas every year. And they're basically talking about the SDI shift is well underway. This moving away from those fixed cables and start using SDI over IP. That's already happened. So that's the basic, which is good for the industry. These other elementary flows, auto provisioning and dematerialized facilities is the term they use for those remote studios. They still think that they're coming in the future and that they have time to get ready, and the technology isn't necessarily ready there. So what we've been doing is basically building demos and proof of concepts to show them that these two top shifts can happen right now. The technology is there today, and really it's about proving to the industry that the technology is there to take the workflows that they've been doing today on fixed infrastructure, move them onto data center technology and IP fabrics, and showing them how this can actually be done. So it's really a proof point to say we're taking your exact workflows today, presenting them back to you in this virtualized infrastructure inside a data center, and then figuring out what are the actual challenges that remain. So there's still a couple of hurdles and technologies that need to be invented, but it's about making sure the industry realizes that the technology currently today is not the barrier for this shift. So when we talk about the shifts, we talked about this whole SDI to IP shift, which is moving away from those fixed cables that they have where the studios are all tied together and the guys producing the show are one cable length away from the camera. That's a big shift that needs to happen, and the industry is already taking care of. So there's lots of work being done in that space. Virtualization and cloud technologies is the next level of shift, if you like, which is now we can take advantage of some of the technologies that have been built in the rest of the world for cloud technologies and virtualizing workflows. And we're applying those to the media use cases. The third shift is really the biggest shift. And the idea, we've been through this with service providers in Cisco when they went through their whole SDN, their software-defined networks, and their NFV, their network function virtualization. I think I talked about that at one of the other WIT sessions. The service providers basically adopted all of this technology, but the one thing they forgot to do is change the way they do what they do. They use new technologies, but their businesses didn't change to take advantage of the flexibility that the technologies enable. So if you take away you're doing business for 10 years, you adopt new technology and you do it exactly the same way, deliver the same products, you spend a lot of money and moved all of your infrastructure over, and it may actually cost you more money. So we saw a big pushback coming from service providers, basically saying that this whole evolution actually cost us money and it's more expensive and we're not seeing the benefit. And it's really because they never made the third shift. And the third shift is understanding how you do what you do today and how that can be rethought and done differently on this new infrastructure. And again, that's somewhere where we're actually spending a lot of our time focusing, which is showing the industry what is possible today and what will be possible, and kind of igniting their imagination to think about new ways of delivering content and producing media experiences. And experiences is kind of the key there, which is it's not just about turning on your TV and watching a show, it's how do people want to interact with media today. And everyone has a cell phone and almost everyone has a Netflix account. All of these other companies, and even YouTube is producing YouTube Live. Facebook is now a media company, no matter what anybody says. There's a lot of new media companies out there today, and they're scaring a lot of these traditional broadcasters because the way people are consuming media has changed. So if you take the approach that you're going to broadcast more efficiently, but people actually want to consume it differently, you're not meeting the requirements. And some of these big broadcasters are really struggling, you know, to find a role for themselves in the future. And their anchor points are news and sports. People still turn on the TV to watch live news and live sports. But again, they're being challenged in that space by some of these over-the-top players. So it's quite an interesting dilemma that they have, but it works perfectly for us because we think the technology is there to enable them to do this, so we can have some extremely interesting conversations about what the future looks like. I'm going to show a couple of demos of stuff that we've built in our team with partners in the industry. We've been showing these at the conferences, really to catalyze some of those conversations and to prove we've taken what you've been doing for years, we've moved it out of the studio, off of this physical hardwired configuration, we've moved it into a generic data center, and this is how it looks, this is how it gets built in the background. So I've got, I think, 3 videos to show, so they don't have sound, but I'll talk you guys through them. So Kyron Hego is actually one of the oldest vendors in TV business today. They were the ones that did the very first graphics on top of a screen for, I think it was the 1973 Winter Olympics for the skiing competition, where you see that clock appearing on the screen. Kyron Hego was the company that invented the concept of putting overlays on top of screens. So we basically built a workflow editor, a tool to define workflows. This is a live news broadcast. There's a bunch of components in there, but some of those components have been virtualized and some of them have been run on bare metal because they need GPUs to process the video packets at high speed. Some of them are run on virtual machines and some of them are run inside containers. So we're taking all of the cloud technologies, applying them to this use case, but giving them a very simple, and this is the user interface, that's gone, we can go back, but that was the user interface that they get, which is the exact same user interface that the producers have if it was a physical box. So the person who's producing the show doesn't see anything different, but the person who's setting up the show has the ability to go into an environment, pull up one of those workflows from a template, click apply, the thing comes online in minutes, and now the studio is ready to do that particular show for the next hour, 2 hours, or whatever it happens to be, as opposed to having a bunch of wiring diagrams where a bunch of engineers go in, wire everything up, and then leave it set there forever, and that studio can't be used for anything else. So it's a big, big change. Ross Video is another big player in the video space today. They do a bunch of the network or the graphics overlays for a lot of the TV and sports live shows. I might skip through this one. It's very similar again. I'll walk you through the user interface just a little bit. You log in, you select a specific show that you want, you pick the template from a preset template of a configuration, you assign the workflow, up pops all of the components in there. So you've got a bunch of, you're going to deploy the workflow. This is coming up in real time. It takes, as I said, a couple of minutes to boot the virtual machines. All of these components here are managed by our system. We've got some external pieces that are in the studio that we don't manage, but we connect into the system. They all come online. You get a little status indicator. We can see some of the statistics of what's flowing between each of those components. So the actual guy inside the studio who's setting it up can actually see that there's packets flowing between each component. And then, of course, they have the user interface to go and produce the show. But this whole thing is built on top of Cisco Cloud Center, Clicker. It's the acquisition that we made last year. So we're using our traditional cloud tools to build these workflows. So we're taking all of the technologies that we're using for the enterprise industry, applying them to the media industry, understanding that the media guys don't want to speak cloud and network. They want to speak diagrams like this. If you go into any TV studio, that's the wiring diagram of how everything is connected together with a bunch of cameras going through a video switcher, going through audio mixers and all that type of technology. Again, this is using VMware. So again, it's Clicker or Cisco Cloud Center on top of VMware to actually do the orchestration piece. But we don't expect the engineers or broadcast engineers to be sitting down at a VMware console. So we hide all of this stuff underneath that UI that you just saw. And then this is the interface that they interact with, which is the user interface into the Ross application, which allows them to go and actually produce the show, bring in clips, switch of overlays, and all the different pieces that you see there. so those two are kind of taking those existing workflows that exist today and moving them into new technologies, and that doesn't move the needle very much forward. It just streamlines in their ability to separate the studio from the production room. There's other really big things happening in the industry, and then I'm going to talk about some of the stretch things that we're trying to reach for. Intel is doing a lot of interesting technology for anyone that watches live sports, but sports is obviously a big draw for the broadcast companies today. And they have something called 360 replay. I'll play this video in a moment and you can kind of see it for yourself. But the concept is they've done this in the soccer stadium in Barcelona. They fit it out with tons of cameras. I think it's 36 5K cameras all around the stadium where they get to see every view of the field from every possible conceivable angle. Then they can stitch all those views together, so as the game is being played, instead of having a fixed view of the camera tracking the ball, they can actually move you and so your view is from a completely different perspective. The video will kind of explain itself, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the challenges that in making this a reality. The reason you don't see this in every sporting event right now is because there's still some technology challenges to be solved. But it's really becoming kind of where the future is possible for some of these experiences. Let's see if this plays. Here we go. Okay, it's a bit glitchy on WebEx. But that's the stadium. It was installed in October last year. 38 5K cameras, so they're very big, high bandwidth cameras. They're basically installed so they're pointing at every possible angle within the field. They use a fiber connection into a data center to take all of those live video feeds. They have to sync them all, so each camera is actually synced on the exact same frame, so that as they switch between cameras, you're not seeing any glitches. They have to obviously calibrate the whole stadium first, but this is kind of fixed infrastructure inside. But what it gives you the possibility is, as the game is being played, this ability to pivot and turn. We'll see a better option now in a minute. And it can even actually help the referees when, for example, if the ball did or didn't cross the line, they can actually go and instead of seeing it from 2 camera angles, they can see 36 different camera angles and actually see exactly where things are happening. So if anyone, I think, watched the Super Bowl last year, they showed some of this stuff and the Intel logo popped up. It takes them about, I think, 90 minutes to render a 10-second clip today to do this. So it can't be done in real time. So as the game is being played, they can't switch to this. So they pick the scenes they want, the data center churns on it. And then at the halftime, they can go back and show you the replays and show you this stuff. They're working on getting it closer to live. But the idea is that if you think about that, if you've got 36 cameras inside the stadium, all with different angles, when you're at home, you're watching one view. To the ability to be able to pick your own view and say, I actually want to watch it from this angle or from this angle, and to be able to change could become a reality if they can get all of those feeds processed and sent out over a distribution network, and then some way either on your TV with a second screen to control what your experience is going to look like. And so we've done a little bit of work in Cisco. Actually, I'll talk about this one first. We did a little bit of work about how that viewing experience and picking different angles actually might be something that we want to make available to the consumers at home and to the people actually watching TV. Switching topics a minute from broadcast, because it's not just broadcast. When we talk about media, there's a lot of other interesting things happening in media around movie production. So we've been working with some of the movie production studios on ways to change the way they do post-production. So when they're filming a movie, they spend weeks to months out there filming, gathering all of the footage. They do all of the editing. Then they bring it into a post-production facility where they spend weeks, maybe months, going through every scene, editing it, bringing in color experts to do color correction, finding out which scenes need to be recut and stuff. Usually what they end up doing, and we've talked to, I think, some folks in Disney studios where they have a big post-production in Burbank facility. And basically every movie that goes through the whole Disney Studios group goes through that facility at some point. They can have up to 150 vendors, different companies, producing media that goes into that movie, either special effects or scenes or audio. So that's 150 different companies all sending their stuff in that all needs to be brought together in this room over a period of weeks and months. And the way they're doing it today is using as much technology as they can get, but it's still a very, very manual process. And so we've been looking at ways where we can possibly take some of the technology that we've built in high performance networks and streaming and security, and collaboration. Collaboration is a huge piece to this too. And give them the ability to actually change the way they do post-production so they can have more people coming into those virtual editing environments. They can actually share the content securely, and securely is the key component here, because if anyone's been watching the news, there's always these scandals coming out where, pre-release either scenes or the whole movie gets released, and suddenly there's hackers getting in and getting access to this stuff. That's I mean, people, their careers end and lose their jobs if you were responsible for securing the movie in 2 weeks before it's released, it gets out there. So we know we need to bring in the whole, we can collaborate and share, but securely is the key. So this is a video that we put together on what we're looking to do in this space, and we're working with some of the movie studios on understanding how they do what they do today, and whether this particular type of workflow would be something that they'd be interested in. So I'll play this video as well. So here you see we've got, like on the left, we have an editing room in London, where there's a bunch of people actually editing and changing the content. You have the art director's studio in Los Angeles, so this person is basically reviewing what these people are doing, but they're in 2 different locations. They need to be looking at the exact same footage. They need to be able to see it at the exact same time if they're going to have some sort of video conference. There can be no lag between these. They need to be able to talk about when you pause it, they need to know they're pausing it at the exact same place. So what we're talking about basically is for each studio having a controller sitting in each one. We'll get into the technology, of course. We have the storage with all of the media, which is locally encrypted, and then we have a streamer that can actually move files between the 2 sites automatically. Now again, we don't want to make this a very manual process, so this needs to be something that's integrated with the tools that they use. But as the editor is making changes, those commands are sent over to the other site where those changes and commands are replicated on the other side to make sure that both sides are seeing the exact same thing at the exact same time. And then the idea is when you're modifying content, so if this guy's changing the color correction or changing something here, again, that information metadata is sent over to the other side so that the person reviewing it on the other side can see the same thing at the same time. And then the concept's going to be then what happens when you want to bring in someone else into an environment like this. So the idea is basically making sure that we can do it at lightning fast speeds with a secure environment so we can move files between them. And then they're really just focusing on what they're doing, which is color correcting scenes. But then they have the ability to go and have this person here say, I want to change this, make this part of the screen brighter, for example, so they can get tools, mark this and say this needs to be brighter. This person's going to see the exact same metadata over here, so we're sharing that information. And then, of course, try and do this as instead of doing this with fixed infrastructure that's really expensive and takes days and weeks to set up for each of these sessions, be able to use whatever tools people have. So these guys could be sitting in an editing suite where they've got lots of very large screens, and this guy could be just sitting in his office where he's just got a big monitor. Then you could have someone else coming in from New York who's the CGI vendor, who he's got some assets to bring in for a specific scene. So again, these may be the 2 parts of the same company. These could be parts from the same studio. This is a third-party vendor. So how do you bring him into your network to make sure that he can contribute to the editing session in a secure fashion, but also making sure he has the right type of network connection so that you can stream the same content to his location, but securely to make sure that no one on this site here can go and steal that data, because when they're sending these content out to these vendors, this is where most of the piracy actually happens, to be honest with you. So we need to make sure that they can bring in those vendors in a secure way and make sure that they can contribute, but they can only see certain parts of the metadata depending on what they're doing. Yep, is there a question?
What kind of compression ratio is used to achieve that synchronicity?
So what kind of compression ratio is used to do it? They're using a bunch of, there's a whole bunch of technology they're using. It depends on the different sites that they have and what type of bandwidth they have into it. So there's a whole bunch of it. They're actually using a bunch of vendors in the industry today. I think they're using, there's a company called Nevion, I think, that builds these streaming boxes where they have a proprietary compression algorithm that they use. We're trying to explore if there's some of the industry standard ones that we can use as well.
Thank you.
Okay. Yep.
Are you actually sending video or just the commands that are run?
It depends. Again, it depends on what's available at the other site. So if the other site, where sometimes we're actually moving the media files over, because if you're doing a collaboration between them, the other site may also want to be able to change the content directly. And for some of them where you're just bringing in someone to do a reviewing, so for example, if the sound editor, for example, is traveling but he still wants to participate, he may be dialing in from a hotel somewhere, but we're not going to send him the actual files. We may just send him a video stream, a low band or bitrate video stream, so he can see what's going on, but obviously he'll have a slightly different experience. So back to this one again. This is going back to TV. We're talking about that whole Intel and 360, different angles and stuff. We built something called Tribal TV in our team as well, which is if you've got friends that are sitting down to watch the same basketball game, we'll be able to kind of connect, using an app and basically say we're going to watch it at the same time, or we're going to sit down in our separate homes, we're individually, You basically register which team you have an interest in. Your friend may do the same, and one may be a Warriors fan, the other could be a Cavaliers fan, for example. In which case you actually might want to see a slightly different version of the game than your friend is seeing, for example. So over here we're going to show you what you're interested in seeing, and over here there's different, for certain scenes they may be saying the same angles, but if you're watching the home team or the away team, you may actually want to see the play from different views and different angles. And so there's an actual demo of this that we've built and that we were showing at the conferences. The intent is that broadcasters should be interested in this, because we're basically saying this is how people actually want to consume your media. You need to be able to produce your media in a way. So today all of those feeds and those 36 cameras go into one director's studio and he picks what you see. We're basically saying get to some of those feeds and make them available for the consumers, have them pick. They can kind of do their own little direction at home. And then the broadcasters get some analytics back then as to, who was using which angles, which views do people prefer most, and kind of getting that feedback, because this is a software piece that's pushed out to the end homes. And so again, I think it's an interesting conversation to have about that third shift, which is a new way of taking all of the interesting feeds that you have as a broadcaster and pushing it out there to consumers and letting them actually interact with it. So we have another project around immersive experiences, which is, again, focused towards how people consume media. And we're working on building an immersive lab with a bunch of screens and lights and stuff. But the intent here is, again, giving you different ways to consume something like watching a sporting game. You can have a very large screen showing you the whole event, but you can have these concepts of a drop-down screen that comes down with statistics. And using transparent OLEDs, these can be screens that they're not blocking your view of what's going on behind, but they're considered like an overlay in a physical space. So you can imagine going to a sports bar or something like that and have an experience like this rather than just watching a big screen. And again, we think that's another kind of interesting way to look at how we think people want to actually consume media. Another idea is actually changing the experience inside the stadium today. So when people go to the stadium, obviously you lose a lot of this perspective, because you've got a seat and you're focused on only what you can see. But the ability to give people, either in the stand or in the seats around them, a bunch of screens that maybe they can customize from their phone, that's close to you, and say, I want to have my experience, I want to get the stats on the players. I mean, when you're watching a sporting event at home, you get a lot more information than you do when you're actually in the stadium itself. It's kind of taking some of that experience and bringing it into the stadium, and making that experience kind of more unique.
Question.
Yep.
Is that integrated into the VR virtual reality?
That's one. Sorry, was that integrated into the virtual reality headsets? There's a big debate going on about virtual reality versus augmented reality. A lot of those immersive experiences are more kind of in the augmented reality. The virtual reality really is strapping on that headset and kind of getting out of a space. And if you're watching, if you're all in the same room with your friends watching a TV show, everyone's strapping on the headsets about the most antisocial thing you can do. So that's where there's a fine line, but there's certain experiences that lend themselves better to virtual reality. Where you could feel like you're in the same space and have avatars and stuff like that. But a lot of what we're focusing on is more what can you do in the homes of people today to kind of change that experience. When every home has a big TV, the headsets is an additional expense, and trying to figure out where that line is an ever-changing. The entire industry, to be honest with you, is trying to find what is the home for virtual reality and augmented reality. I was actually at a conference in LA last weekend where it was AR, VR, and the entire industry is trying to figure out where does it fit? It's phenomenal technology, but where are people going to adopt it? The concept of putting something on your head still isn't there. People have, Google came out with the Google Glass, and it kind of was a shot in the pan. People didn't like the concept of having to wear something and what it does to your experience. So I don't think it's figured out yet.
No, but there is market for VR as well as AR.
Yep. For different experiences, absolutely, yeah.
When you kind of spoke about how people want to consume this kind of stuff, and you showed all the screens, it kind of, the consumption angle kind of drifted me, yeah. So when you spoke about how people want to consume this, different people want to consume it in different ways. And now we also have like something called Second Life. Yeah. I don't know if you're aware of it, but should be, right?
Yeah.
So people want to go into that, sort of gaming environment and then kind of want to consume. Have you been doing anything over there?
Not specifically within our team. I think that a lot of the industry is exploring how to take all of that technology, and so like one of the things that we noticed with one of the big studios, without mentioning a name, is as they're producing animated movies right now, when they produce the animated movie, then they want to produce a virtual reality experience, and then they want to produce a game around that. They're all completely separate projects. And one of the things that they're starting to see right now is if they can take some of the tools as they're building the movie, take some of the assets from the movie, make them available to the experience builders and the games builder while the movie's getting built, you can actually have, and there's a movie coming out, it's coming out in November actually, that Pixar has it. It's this Cinco de Mayo, I can't remember the name, Coco I think the name of the movie is. They have a whole slew of interactive media experiences coming out, which is using the exact same content from the movie itself. And the idea is to create a kind of a world that you can go into and explore it, where the movie shows you a story, but then there's a world that you can go into and explore where you can actually go behind. You can go down an alleyway that wasn't in the movie and say, I wonder what was down there, and actually go down and explore that. That's going to be very interesting, I think.
Yeah, kind of took me to Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah. Down the rabbit hole, right? Okay, let me keep going. So there's a bunch of technology behind this, and of course, you know, being an engineer, we look at the experiences, and we have a bunch of people in our team looking at purely the experiences, and then we have a bunch of people looking at the technology. The real magic happens when those two teams get together and figure out how to make the future a reality on top of the technology that we have. So there's a bunch of stuff that we've been building, which we've been building for the service provider industry and for the data center industry, and the media needs it just as much as anyone else. Around policy, around analytics, around the network obviously itself is crucial when you're doing very large video feeds, moving them around. Orchestration and automation, everything I'm showing you has to be automated. These can't be manual things. We don't want to expose the complexity of cloud technologies to creative people that really want to create those types of experiences. And so the industry itself, the media industry, has had to figure out some of their own challenges in this space around live 4K video flows. If you actually talk about the output from a 4K video camera, I don't even know what it is from a 5K, but 4K is like 12 gigabits per second. If you've got 36 of those producing live feeds, that's a huge amount of data that's coming out. How do you get all of that into a server and process it and get it out again? There's some big challenges there. And these people don't like compression in the production phase. They're happy to compress in the distribution phase, but the production guys like this to be, you know, uncompressed video flows. We've been working with a whole bunch of the standards industry because, like every other shift, this shift involves the standards being created so that the technology and the vendors out there can adhere to those standards so everything can interoperate and work together. What we've been actually doing specifically is looking at some of the challenges that are in the industry with video flows and finding out some of the perceived issues with this SDI over IP and some of the performance. And we've been calling a little Mythbuster project where the industry says something doesn't work, we'll take it into our lab, we'll see if it does work, and if it does work, we'll say how we got it to work, and we call that a myth busted, right? So our goal is to stop the excuses the industry has for not adopting the technology. There's many, many other reasons why that, you know, any new technology won't get adopted, but at least we're going through all the technical ones and saying these are no longer issues. These are only the perceived issues are not necessarily there. So we have a bunch of folks actually going through those and breaking them one by one. So this is one of our favorite slides in CTAO, excuse me. This is about, you know, this is where we get to geek out a little bit. At the very, very top, those workflows that I showed you, that's what a broadcast engineer, they have a 4K video source, they're going to have some ad insertion component, some video encoder, and they're going to send it out to a distribution network. That's about as simple as it gets, but that's what they want to see. When you actually realize that on some cloud infrastructure, there's going to be a service view which actually talks about endpoints and networks. There still is the ad insertion in the video encoder. When you talk about the policy view, you have to have some sort of security to make sure that only these components can talk to these components. So we have to apply a policy layer on top of what gets orchestrated. Then if we're using cloud technologies and virtualization, there's going to be a virtual topology. So there's a network overlay that gets created. And then there's a physical topology, which is where does all this stuff actually physically run on an IP network in a data center somewhere, but actually which servers are connected to which. And then there's a resource view, which is, you know, how much CPU memory and storage is actually used by this particular flow when it happens. The guys inside the control room, they just want to see the thing on the top. All of the rest of the stuff has to be figured out by somebody. And so that's what we're looking to do, is create a system that can take their intent, which is I have a very simple intent and I can define it in my language, but actually realize that on top of all of the infrastructure and provide an assurance, a way to guarantee them that what they wanted has been run on top of the infrastructure and that their show will work. And of course, to make sure it works, we'll always give them a backup of it. So there's 2 instances of everything running. If one of them fails, we don't expect them to know why it failed. We actually don't expect them to know that it failed. we'll automatically switch to the backup workflow that we have running, and we'll do frame accurate switching. So from a broadcast perspective, anyone watching that flow coming out, we'll actually switch over on a frame boundary, so you don't actually see any changes if there's 50, 60 frames per second. So the intent is that they don't actually get below this red line. So that red line is basically above which we want the industry to stay. We want them to understand what technology is below the red line, because that's where we add value. But we want to provide them a solution where we can kind of consume all of that technology in a very, very simple to read workflow designer. So that those tools I showed you, okay, those UI I showed you may look a little bit complex, but to a broadcast engineer, that's what they do every day. That's what they go and see. Behind that is many, many, many layers of technology down to the infrastructure to go and build that. We hide all of that from them, but we give them a way to actually know the health of a service as it comes up, and the ability to have active and backup and do failover between them. And then, as we said, there's going to be someone in the broadcast team who understands the network, because of course they're going to have a network operations team managing all of this stuff together. But we give them the tools to deploy automatically and then do service assurance on top of that infrastructure as much as possible. So we've done a bunch of hard problem solving. This is kind of a list of things that we started to work on. Again, these were the myths that weren't myths. These were the myths that actually were true, that we actually had to go and solve. So some of them were just perceived problems. There's a list here of moving off of the fixed appliances. So we have an example. NBC in New York has, I think, in 30 Rockefeller Plaza, which is really expensive real estate, they have 13 racks of transcoders. So I think they transcode, I don't know how many millions of hours of TV shows every year. This farm of transcoding is in that location. It's never enough for them. They always have deadlines that they have to meet to get these files transcoded, so they get pushed out to all the distribution networks and pushed into Netflix and pushed into iTunes. They're looking to get that equipment out. They're looking to get it into some data center, potentially far away. So they want to move off these fixed appliances that only do one thing. When those boxes are not transcoding, they're servers, but they're transcode servers. They're not used for anything else because they've got a single purpose. They want to have a large set of data centers located, in cheaper locations, connected by high-speed fiber, that they can actually go and use. When I want to do transcoding, I'll put it into wherever there's a data center that has the resources, rather than saying it must be in this fixed infrastructure. So then when they have deadlines, they can... Quinn's telling me to move? Okay. When they have deadlines, they can take advantage of wherever they have the resources available. There's a whole bunch of other things that we've been solving, but the idea is that this is the technology that we're building on this side over here to go solve those problems. We just came back, Dave Ward was presenting at a media conference in New York last week, where it was basically focused on the sports industry. And they're an industry that's also trying to figure out how they can adopt as much of this technology as possible. And again, it's the same concept of the people and skills, the equipment and the content feeds. All of these, they all have to solve these problems, but the technology is the one we think we have an edge on, and we have some answers for to help them solve some of those problems. Again, this is showing what happens today in a lot of the sports networks. They have these things called OB trucks, and if you've ever gone to like a big live event, or if you ever drove past Levi Stadium when the Super Bowl is on, I think they had 13 outside broadcast trucks. So NBC was producing that live. These are 13 monster trucks, and they're basically a mobile studio. So all of the video feeds from all of the cameras inside are hardwired into the back of this truck. The director of the show is sitting in the back of a truck in a parking lot, right? It's not a very effective way to produce stuff. You could imagine if they had a very small fiber going off to some location somewhere, the director could be somewhere much more comfortable in the back of a truck and do it. And then they could actually bring in the best talent they have for producing shows from wherever they are and produce it remotely, rather than having them sitting in the back of a truck. So this whole outside broadcast truck model is something that we're kind of going after and saying this whole transition to IP there may still want to be a truck. I mean, if there's 1 billion people watching the Super Bowl, they're not going to have one fiber coming out of the stadium and hope it works. They'll probably have many, many backups. But the intent is, let's start moving to start adopting some of the newer technology. So we're moving away from that other picture to this picture, which lots more wires, lots more people can get involved in the broadcast. There's a whole bunch of slides on this, but I'm not going to go through them all. There's another project that we're doing. It's called To Immerse, and this is funded by the EU. Actually, it's our team in the UK in Paris driving this one. You can see some of the big partners: BT, BBC, Cisco, Illuminations, Kyron Hago. So there's lots of people in the industry involved in this, and it really is about a new way to distribute media and content. And this is an example of one of the projects. So MotoGP, this is the big motorcycle racing, which is huge in Europe and in the UK. It's about giving, again, people this same concept, which is you've got all of these feeds. You have the ability to get all of the feeds coming in from cameras on the motorbike. You've got analytics coming in from wearables and sensors on the drivers and stuff, from the riders. The ability to take all of that data and give it to people on an iPad app that they can consume, and then they can, as I said, do their own production. They can pick their own angles that they want to do. And this is, again, a live pilot that they're working on in Europe right now. So some of this stuff is actually beginning to get tried out for real, as opposed to just being something that happens inside the labs. Cisco is, for anyone that doesn't know, Cisco was very involved in the Rio Olympics last year. So we sent a lot of equipment, provided all of the network, basically the IP network, a bunch of security, routing. And again, we were heavily involved in helping NBC realize, and you no idea how many hours, I don't know how many hundreds or thousands of hours of footage they actually produced from that Olympics. It's such a huge, huge event. One of the challenges we have with something like the Olympics is all of that equipment came back to the US after the Rio Olympics. They've got about 6 months to put it into another test location. It's locked down for the next Olympics. So they don't change that often, so you get a small window to bring in new technology, because they start testing for the next Olympics 6 months after the first Olympic or the current Olympics finishes. But again, we have a big opportunity to actually start seeding some of our technology into really high profile events like the Olympics. I think I'm running out of time. How much time is left?
We give you an extra 5 minutes. We're cutting Q&A down to 15 minutes.
Okay, perfect. So all of this is very, very interesting, but Cisco is a networking company at its core, even though we've got lots of other businesses. I'd get shot if I didn't actually talk about the network a little bit, so I'm not a networking guy, you know this, but I will talk about the network. One of the challenges is media is a very different beast than a lot of the enterprise applications that we run. The type of flows that they put through a network are different. So just taking our routers and switches as they are today and dropping them into media companies isn't necessarily going to work. But there's some advantages in media as well. So even though they're very big flows in the network, they're pretty well-groomed flows. When you turn on a 4K camera, you get a steady stream out of that, and it will continue the exact same until you turn it off again. So you can predict how the network is going to flow in a media much more than you can in a regular enterprise data center type environment. But the concept here is how we actually control quality of service, because broadcast, especially live broadcast, is about no black screens. Everything has to work all of the time. There's zero tolerance to glitches coming out on the screen. It said people lose their jobs over things like this. So you have to assure a level of quality of service that we don't necessarily provide in all of our products today. And so we've been working, and the Nexus team has been working on how do we actually go and replace what's there today, which is a video router or an SDI router. And these are products that have been in the industry for quite some time, where these are the fixed products that are inside the studios today. And we're basically taking that fixed router out and replacing it with an IP router and a network controller. And so we've been working with the Nexus team on the IP fabric for media. Don't know why that slide went black.
Zero tolerance.
Wow.
We are sharing on WebEx. They can see it on WebEx. It looks like something that you can put on the actual monitors in the room.
Okay, so these are amazing slides. You'll have to trust me. But the idea is basically to give them the ability to orchestrate their network to support the flows that they have. It's fine, there's only a couple of more slides left, but the intent is that they have to be able to, again, we don't want the broadcasters, we want them to specify what it is they need out of the network. They already have tools that they use to do that today. We're basically hiding behind those tools and saying, you still work with your existing vendors in that space, and we'll have our equipment underneath it, and we've opened up our API. So there's a company like Evertz, EVS, there's a whole bunch of companies that are out there providing network equipment for the media companies today. Our equipment is basically underneath those and using the APIs from our equipment into those. Okay. So yeah, we're not supposed to have black screens, but we have a gray screen. Let me see. It's not coming back now?
It's
rebooting?
Connecting with the video system.
I don't think it's going to impact the staff.
Okay, so let's go to the questions. I don't think there's much to... Oh, here we go. All right. These are a list of things that we've been focusing on. These are challenges that media flows have inside networks. And we have the Cisco team, the Nexus team, and under Pradeep Kathal, the professional media network team, have been working on actual features into our existing product line to allow you to take a Nexus 9K switch and use it for media flows and integrate it with the rest of the networks inside media companies. So the idea here basically is that we talk about is a fancier version of the first slide I showed, all the way from acquiring all the way out to experience. There's a lot of change that's happening here, and our goal is to have IP at every stage. IP gives us the flexibility that we want to deliver those types of experiences. This is basically one of the pods that we built to showcase this. So we've been actually building thank you, Quinn. We've actually been building, this is our proof point. This is 3 clouds in a rack. There's a bare metal cloud, there's a virtual machine cloud with VMware, and there's a container cloud using Kubernetes. So all those videos that I showed at the start with Karen, Hago, and Ross, we actually built them and run them on this, and we bring this to conference with us to show them, instead of you having 12 or 13 physical boxes for one news show and then another 10 boxes for another one, you can take both of those workflows, virtualize them, and run them inside this rack, and this rack can run 8 instances of those things. So it's really a proof point, and it's to show them that in here it's all Cisco end-to-end, obviously. But to show that a media data center, which is basically just generic x86 that can run your enterprise workloads using the same tools like the Cisco Cloud Center, can also run your media workloads once we have the Nexus 9K with all those media features in there and support.
Pod is point of deployment.
Pardon?
What is pod stand for?
Pod is like a rack of equipment. It doesn't really have a whole meaning. It's basically an integrated solution of hardware and software integrated solution to basically say, if they want to say, how do I buy this today? Do I have to go and build? What do I connect to what type of servers, what type of storage, what type of network? We're creating these solutions, which is a kind of a validated hardware software solution, and say one of these pods can do this amount of work. So they speak in how many TV shows can I produce, and then we say this rack can produce 4 live TV shows for you. It has everything you need, all the resources to produce those. This is the kind of the ecosystem that we're working with. These are all the big media vendors that exist today that we're working with at various levels. These are who the broadcast companies are doing business with today. We're not trying to replace them. We're trying to partner with those people to get their stuff to run on our servers. And obviously we're doing a lot of work with Intel. And then there's a bunch of societies that we're members of and getting plugged into some of those again, standards bodies and societies to make sure that we're actually talking to the right people and well connected. And that's pretty much it, I think. Yeah, future of TV. So any questions? We have a microphone if anyone wants. Yep.
I'm just kind of curious how you...
Oh. And we probably have some questions on WebEx too?
Yeah, we do have one question.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm just curious to get your opinion on where you see this kind of turned into more of a B2C type opportunity. We talked a lot about B2B and broadcast high quality with phones and mobility, location-based services along with augmented reality, mixed reality. When might we be able to see this technology being able to edit on the fly, live environments in the hands of a consumer rather than in a business environment?
It's a good question. I think the first challenge we have is getting the broadcasters giving the data and the feeds out there. Today, you turn on your TV, you get a linear view of what's happening. I think working with the way content is distributed and made available comes first, and then the question can be, if you think about some of the 2 Immerse stuff and the tribal TV, is a big dipping a big toe into that environment of saying, if I have an iPad, which is, I'm watching it on TV, my iPad's my controller, it's my editing suite. I can go and interface with it. I'm kind of the director of my show right now. And the idea might be actually that people could actually, during a game, do their own little editing, save that, and then share that with their friends and saying, here's my version of the show, and you want to watch it as a replay, and here's my edit of it. Maybe there'll be certain people who do a much better job of others, and you post it on YouTube and say, here's my view of it. That's all possible, but it's hinged on the broadcasters giving the content and the media available first.
Thank you.
What's on WebEx?
Question from the bridge is, when sending content to vendors, how do you ensure that the content is not stored at the vendor location?
So there's a lot of, that's a huge open area, and the real question is, how do you secure that data with the vendors? There's different classes of vendors that we're finding out too as we work with the studios and understand some of them are trusted vendors that they can actually send them the files. Everything is watermarked, first of all, before it goes anywhere. So one of the challenges that they have is when stuff gets out, they know exactly where it got out from because it's watermarked. But the problem is they want to stop it from getting out. So they want to prevent it rather than being able to figure out where it came from. So one way is, there's a challenge. Instead of sending the media, is streaming the media to those people. it still doesn't stop someone taking out their phone and recording it. You can never stop that. If someone can see something on their screen, they can capture it in a low quality, video and then send it out. So there is going to be that level of issue that you really can't prevent from happening. It's like people going into the movie theaters. I don't know if they do that so much anymore, but they used to go in with their little cameras, and then you have a pirate copy with someone's head in the middle of your screen, right? That's not necessarily going to stop, right? But there is a lot of work that we're doing around policy and integrating with the editing tools to make sure that not only can we check who's accessing the file, we can check where you're accessing it from. So for example, if the credentials match and this person can access the file, but they're coming from Japan instead of coming from Romania, for example, well, we know that vendor is in Romania, so why are we getting a request from Japan to access this, right? So we can shut down that. So it's about using a combination of tools, including geolocation, to make sure that this vendor can access this content with this secure key when they're in this location. So there's a lot of stuff. That's where the policy stuff comes into play to figure out how to actually secure that. And that's a big problem to solve. That there's no one killer solution for it. And a lot of it then comes down to the third shift I talk about, which is the processes, changing some of the business processes and how they do that. Any other questions?
Hi, that was a great talk, and one of the few that I've seen which don't have a lot of slide content. So you did a great job there.
Thank you.
So my question is around, you said you're sending really high quality video streams, right? And they're going over the network. So has your team done any work towards looking at technologies like segment routing to
Absolutely.
ensure?
Yeah.
So could you tell us a bit more about what you've done in that area?
So segment routing is being used much more on the distribution side. So as I said, most of what we've been focusing on is on the left side of that workflow. Segment routing plays an absolute huge play in distribution and getting content pushed out into distribution networks. But one of the shifts that I had talked about, which was, we talked about transcoding, we talked about doing that in a data center, a combination of segment routing and pushing transcoding out close to the customers. Because the way distribution networks work today is there's a single raw version of a movie or a TV show that's produced. It gets transcoded into many different formats, and then it's pushed into a distribution network. So you start off with one file that gets maybe transcoded to 12 different formats that gets pushed into a CDN. So depending on whether you're coming in from an iPhone or you're coming in from Netflix, depending on what device you have, there's different copies of that same content out there in the CDN. So we use segment routing to figure out how to go and access that data. So there's a whole bunch of projects that are using segment routing from a mobility perspective to figure out how to get access to that content. But something else that we're looking at is, instead of pushing 12 different versions of the file into the distribution network, maybe just push one version out and 10 seconds, the first 10 seconds of each of the different formats, and do the transcoding out there in the distribution network. So when someone comes in from an Android phone using Amazon Video Player, for example, the moment they access the file, we give them the first 10 seconds, but we then start the just-in-time transcoding of the rest of the movie. So that's kind of another way of thinking of it. So there's absolutely a place for segment routing, and we have a whole ICN project around hybrid ICN and how that aligns with segment routing happening, but more on the distribution side than on the production side.
And I had another question regarding, I noticed you mentioned that about a hybrid cloud.
Yep.
So when delivering this kind of a technology, how much of it do you think is going to reside in on-prem, and how much can we make use of the public cloud infrastructure for these customers?
A lot of it will still need to be on-prem. So that's why when we talk about cloud, we put hybrid in there for a very specific reason. A lot of it will be on-prem because of the nature of the bandwidth of it, and sending it to the public cloud to do post-production and editing on it may not be, if you want to stay live, just the latencies of doing so may not actually work. But there's lots of stuff that can go into public cloud. And so the strategy that we want is to give the broadcasters a single cloud strategy that allows them to keep what's on-prem, and leverage the cloud for what makes sense. Now, some of it may come down to how secure this content is and how secure it needs to be. And the idea of sending certain files to a public cloud, it's never going to happen for movie post-production, for example. They're going to keep that locked down until they can guarantee that the public cloud is secure enough. And so then there's the colo, which is kind of an off-prem private cloud, if you like, that kind of comes in the middle of that public to private hybrid. So the technology should be there so they can have a single cloud strategy, and then they make the decision about where to place stuff. But there's definitely some stuff that's happening today in public clouds. I mean, MLBAM, if you've ever into baseball, they have a phenomenal over-the-top play which is all run in the cloud. Yep, any other questions?
Yeah, one quick question from the bridge. What is future of TV and IoT security now that it's all about connecting to the network, providing seamless viewing or broadcasting experiences for viewers? And how do we ensure network will not be taken over by hackers through internet connect devices?
That's a big question, isn't it? How do we, well, from a security perspective, the challenge that we have is, as I said, we're going to try and break down these technology barriers to say what's possible. The industry's adoption rate of some of these technologies is going to be how comfortable they feel with these technologies, and that's why we're working on the training program. But there's also the security piece, which is absolutely huge. And so IoT itself opens up a whole bunch of security conversations itself. But the concept of how we allow the flexibility of giving a richer experience to people in their homes as they're consuming media in a secure fashion. Of course, you want to make sure that what they're seeing is what you want them to see, and you want to make sure that they can't have people coming in stealing content. The security is going to be probably one of the biggest questions that we have, and so when we talk, but not just for media, for what it's worth. So, hybrid cloud and public cloud security is top of mind. You know, the people are willing to pay more for security than it's not just about finding the cheapest option. So there's no simple single answer to that question. That's a huge open topic that we're going to spend a lot of time figuring out, I think. And we can only go so far with security. You can never guarantee 100% of anything. So it's really going after what the major attack vectors are and making sure you can secure where you can. But there's anyone that says that security will be done by ABC and then you're done. There's no end to it, because the amount of ways people find of hacking into systems and where the attacks are coming from is an ever-changing thing. So I think security is going to be an ongoing part of not just media, but anything that we do in cloud. Any other questions? Yep.
So for the
you showed there a workflow with being able to do post-production.
Yep.
At different remote sites. Have you considered taking those learnings and having them in other scenarios, such as working from home and collaborating and things like that? Because real time.
So that's very much a collaboration play. We're leveraging Cisco Spark, and they're already actually some of the post-production facilities we're using use telepresence already today. I think there is a role for taking what we're already doing in collaboration and applying it to this use case. And then to your point, to figure out if there's technology that we could develop for post-production and how it would apply back to the generic collaboration use cases. We haven't gotten that far yet, but that could be very interesting. I mean, we're always looking for different ways of applying. So all the technology I'm showing you here today wasn't built for media. We built this for other stuff, and now we've got the pleasure, if you like, of working on media, which is a lot of fun. But absolutely, we're always looking for ways to figure out how to apply. But we have to learn first, get one use case proof point done. A lot of what we have is very flexible, we think. But if you go and say this can do 27 different things, nobody will believe you. If you go prove you can do one thing really, really well, you have an opportunity then to apply it to other things. But I'll tell you a quick story actually, because it is actually a really cool industry to work in. But at the same time, you've got to remember where our role is in the industry. So I'll give you an example. I was meeting with Disney a bunch of times this year, actually. So we go down to Burbank and meet with them in their studio lot, which is really an office building. They've got some cool stuff in the office building, no doubt. But I came home and told my kids I was visiting with Disney today, and my son was convinced that I was in Disneyland all day. And so there was a bunch of us from Cisco there. We were like little kids. So we were going to the 4th floor of the building, and the guy who was bringing us up told us that Marvel Studios is on the 3rd floor. So we kind of snuck out on the 3rd floor, and in the reception lobby, they have a huge display of all the Iron Man suits from the movie. So of course we took our selfie photographs, and so I came home and showed my 6-year-old son me standing in front of an Iron Man suit. And he said, "So did you get to meet Iron Man?" And I said, "No, but I got to meet the head of network operations for Disney." And he immediately got completely disinterested, but I thought, but he met Iron Man. So it is a cool industry to work with, but we're working with the geeks in that industry who are trying to use technology to solve the problems. The creative folks, they don't care about this technology. Just gets in the way of them doing their job. So we have to be seamless. We have to be invisible. So when they go into those editing studios, they don't want to know anything about the technology, and they're not impressed by the technology. But the guys who are downstairs who are enabling it, they're the guys whose jobs depend on being able to make these creative people more creative. Okay, so any other questions?
I have a quick question.
Okay.
If anybody is interested in this new technology, is there an open source piece to it? How could they learn more about it?
So
any suggestions?
There's, like what we're doing in CTO for Open Source and Linux Foundation, Dave's working with the Linux Foundation to kind of create a media sub-project for the media industry to start, because they're just like every other industry. There's a bunch of geeks producing really cool software, and they have a desire to share it amongst themselves. So I think through the Linux Foundation, we're looking at opportunities to create an environment where they can start sharing, because I don't think we couldn't find one that's out there today. So we've joined a bunch of, we joined the Advanced Imaging Society, and I think USC has this thing called the ETC, or Entertainment Technology Center. We kind of joined what we believe are the big industry committees, and we're not seeing a lot of support for people wanting to do open source in that space. So we're working with the Linux Foundation to see what we can kind of create in that space. Could be interesting.
That's great. If no other questions, I just want to thank Mike, not only for presenting today, but always supporting Women in Tech, and Christina and I. So thank you, Mike.
Thank you so much, sir. I have actually
one before you. Next month is going to be about cyber intrusion. We actually have a very special guest. He's a resident senior FBI agent from San Francisco Field Operations, and he goes and makes these presentations to private companies, telling them about what they are seeing from government's point of view, what type of cyber crime is happening, the whole ransomware stuff. So he's going to come and talk to us about it. Unfortunately, it's going to be a Cisco internal only presentation, not recorded, presented out of his laptop, and the slides won't be available. But it's going to be an interesting presentation. Thank you.
Okay, so I had one more thing just to say. No, it's